Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the first episode of X's and O's in a very long time. I'm Joe Thompson along with Isak Dinesen. Later on in the show, we're going to be discussing all of March Madness. We'll go through each region, see what we think of each side of the region and who, maybe ultimately who we think are going to win. But first, we're going to give a brief recap of the Summit League tournament. If you were watching on our YouTube channel, Isak and I were in Sioux Falls covering the tournament. We posted a ton of videos, press conferences, pre- and post-game shows. Check it out. It's all on our YouTube channel. But Isak, starting with the women, how do you think they played overall against USD?
I mean, well, the final score probably tells the whole story. Sometimes that isn't the case, but with the Bison women, at least, it was not a good showing, and unfortunately, it had to end up resulting in Maren Walseth's job being lost. It was just a really rough season in general for NDSU, and unfortunately, it culminated with a pretty unfortunately typical effort with what we saw in that game. Just not really much offense and struggling to contain South Dakota's dynamic scoring. It's just unfortunate with the way that whole thing ended up.
Yeah.
But as for the tournament as a whole, I mean, it was kind of what I thought, at least based on my research coming into the tournament. It was really only USD and SDSU that could do really much of anything. Only they could stop themselves, it seemed like, from my initial research, and that's what ended up happening. There was only one upset. That was the UND versus Denver game, where Denver was held scoreless for 6.5 minutes at the end of the game. So I was impressive, but there really wasn't much else to garner in terms of individual team performances.
Yeah, I'm going to have to agree with you. There was really no other way of putting it. It was going to be South Dakota State versus USD in the championship. They're the two best teams by far in the women's side of the Summit League.
And Macy Miller ended up setting the Summit League record for most points scored in a career in that championship game as well against USD.
But going back quickly to the NDSU-USD game, yes, NDSU didn't play well overall, but what really, really killed them from the difference between what they did lose by and what they could have lost by was that terrible second quarter. They only made one shot and two free throws.
That was a Sofia Zovalovic three-pointer, and then their other 2 points in that quarter were free throws.
Just one shot and two free throws was all they scored in that quarter, and there was, no matter how well they have to shoot lights out for the rest of the game in order to even have a shot at beating South Dakota, but it was never going to happen. Good
luck to the NDSU women's basketball program as they look for a new head coach.
Speaking of head coaches, when we got back to our hotel after that day, we were just rolling around, like, editing videos, getting them uploaded and stuff, and then we found out that NDSU Athletics and Maren Walseth had mutually agreed to part ways. It wasn't overly shocking. What were your reactions to it when you first heard the news?
It's very hard to determine. I haven't, done too much of I haven't followed the team too much other than this year really, and it's unfortunate, yes, that this program has been mired in what they have been over the last decade, but it's just really hard to say, what the direction of the program is looking like right now. They've kind of been treading water. It's just definitely unfortunate to see, and at least it wasn't a situation where the athletic department and her, were displeased with each other, and there was an argument that led to the firing, but at least it was something that they could at least, both agree that this isn't working. Yeah. Let's try to, I'm willing to walk away if you're willing to part ways with me. That's fine. I don't know. It's just an interesting situation with this whole situation. Hopefully it can get patched up soon.
The writing was really on the wall there. When you look at Walseth's 5 seasons, she went 40 and 106 in her time here.
That's 8 wins a year. That's not going to get it done.
It's not just it's a team effort, but when it comes down to it, the coach is the one who's going to pay the price for it. When you go 40 and 106, regardless of how good or bad your players are, you can't get rid of college players unless they transfer.
Correct.
You can't get rid of college players unless they transfer. So the coach is going to get the axe. We're going to go ahead and move on to a more brighter side of the Summit League tournament.
Yeah, maybe a little bit.
If you weren't paying attention to sports at all this past week, the NDSU men's basketball team shockingly ended up being the winners of the men's side of the Summit League men's basketball tournament, due in part to the fact that South Dakota State lost in the first round to the 8th-seeded Western Illinois Leathernecks.
Certainly helped. That certainly helped.
Yes, that certainly did help. But taking a look, I don't want to go too into much how well the Bison play.
You can
how
see
well they
our
play.
reactions to those individual games on our channel.
And we know how well they played because they won the frickin' tournament. So just kind of take me through the differences. They started the season off 2-7, and they ended up winning the Summit League tournament and getting a playing game for the NCAA tournament, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But kind of take me through what the difference was between how they played in the tournament and how they played to start the year.
I think they probably played more together, I'd say, at the very end of the season. I mean, with that 5-game winning streak they had in February, I think that was when it really all started. They did have some struggles heading into the tournament with those 3 losses where they were up by double digits at one point, but they were still playing very well. It was just a matter of coming into tournament time. It really helped with that Vinny Shahid shot against Purdue Fort Wayne to help them close out games. But nonetheless, I think they play much better together. I think there was even a very good quote I thought from from Coach Richmond. It's much better. It's much more fun when no one cares who gets the credit. Yeah. I think that's pretty much the gist of what was said. But that really accurately represents what we saw in Sioux Falls last weekend for the Bison. It was that weekend for the Bison. Just no one really cared who led the way, and no one cared who scored. It was Tyson Ward. It wasn't just Tyson Ward and Vinny Shahid. Cameron Hunter was fantastic in that tournament for NDSU. Everybody stepped up when they needed to step up, it seemed like, at points in time, and it was just a great effort top to bottom, I thought.
100% agree with that. Like you said, it was a full team effort when you're going into the tournament. When you look at the beginning, there wasn't really much gelling going on. Vinny Shahid wasn't playing up to what his potential is now. Sam Griesel was hurt a lot to start the year. He was dealing with some injuries. But then once you got into the tournament, and then through that 5-game winning streak and to close out the season and the win against Purdue Fort Wayne, going into the tournament, you saw how well that team could play well together. Like you said, Cam Hunter played really well. He shot 9 of 12 from 3-point
That's
range.
That's ridiculous.
And Jordan Horn as well, he also stepped up. He wasn't getting a lot of minutes during the season.
He was hardly in the rotation at all this season. Right.
Into the tournament, once he got into the tournament and got his minutes, he was making threes, he was shooting, he was playing good defense. Overall, it was just a much better team effort than what was shown earlier in the season. Now, looking ahead to their play-in game against NC Central, the winner of that game goes on to play the number 1 overall seed Duke. We're not going to look too far ahead because why would you?
There's this game first.
We got to focus, take it one game at a time. Looking at the statistics that I saw on Twitter yesterday, they're pretty evenly matched offensively, but overall, NC State is better defensively. Where do you see that game going as of right now?
It's so hard to predict these types of games because you have to factor in conference strength. It's very difficult. I keep saying this is very difficult, but NDSU plays in I think they play in a pretty tough conference. The Summit League is a pretty formidable conference. There's a lot of talent in that conference. But with the MEAC, which is where NC Central plays, they have I think much lower caliber teams, I think, as opposed to what the Summit League has to offer. So NC Central's defensive numbers might be a little bit inflated by their competition. They did win. They've won. Give them credit, at least. They've won 8 of their last 10 coming into this one and sweeping. Obviously, they won all 3 of their games in their conference tournament. They were not the number 1 seed in the tournament, but give them credit. They still, played all their games in that tournament and won all the games in that tournament, and they played well defensively, looking at their final scores, at least in those 3 games. But, it's just a matter of, obviously, I think NDSU, they can get into offensive shootouts and win them, I think, probably easier than UNC Central can just by looking at their games they played this season. But it's really kind of hard to project these types of games when these teams know very little about each other coming in.
Yeah. One thing I thought was interesting was going back to the Summit League tournament was that NDSU only had a limited amount of time to go over who they were playing before they actually played them in the tournament. They're doing basically the same thing here. They only have 2 days to prepare for NC Central. How do you think they're going to game plan about that? Or what does a team go to game plan for a team that they've never played before?
I think you probably just watch film, essentially, and then just see what other teams did to try to slow them down and just kind of mimic that in some way. It's kind of difficult. It's a little it's a little interesting to see what you can do. I mean, obviously, I was never an athlete. I never had to go through film sessions or anything like that at a varsity basketball level. But I can only assume that that's kind of what they're going to try to do. I think looking at UNC Central's roster composition, I think it's pretty similar to NDSU in terms of height and weight distribution. But I still think, I mean, I can only go off of what I've seen. I think NDSU, like I mentioned a little bit ago, I think they can get into shootouts and they can put up points in a hurry on teams, and that can fluster teams defensively. I think the Bison should have a good chance, but but in terms of preparing for them, it's a little difficult. You have to go kind of just look at the film and just make adjustments quickly and on the fly during the game.
Yeah, and one last question before we go to break. We know, obviously, you said earlier that NDSU is really gelling well as a team right now. Anybody who's on the floor is producing in some way. In one of the summer league tournament games, 10 players touched the floor and 10 players scored. So, of this, either a starter or a player on the bench, who do you think is going to try and take charge in that game against NC Central?
Probably the heart and soul of the team, Vinny Shaheed, you'd say. I mean, wouldn't you say? Based on his Summit League tournament performance, he won the tournament MVP.
Yes, I would agree. It could be Vinny Shaheed, but I could also say it could be guys like Dan Gu, it could be Cam Hunter, it could be anybody on that team can step up and start just draining shots and playing excellent defense.
You got to remember, guys, this is a team that does not have a single senior on the roster, and I mean, it seemed like Vinny Shaheed was that guy that they turned to, especially in the last two games against Western Illinois and Omaha, that they turned to when they needed something big to happen for them, and he was able to deliver. And it kind of seems like with the way that the team is going towards, it kind of seems like zero in white or gold, whatever jersey they decide to wear that game. It might be him that ends up being the catalyst against UNC Central.
I think I agree. It could very easily well be Vinny Shaheed, but I also think you got to look at Tyson Ward.
Certainly.
He was almost just as dominant as Vinny was in that Summit League tournament game.
At least two of the games. He had 3 points in the Western Illinois game, but still very good effort from him.
Vinny didn't have as many points in the Oral Roberts game, and Tyson went off there as well. So it really kind of depends on how you look at it. Vinny could go off, Tyson could go off, Rocky Cruiser could even go off, and then you got the guys off the bench like Dan Gu, Cam Hunter, Jordan Horn.
This team's deep.
This team is they may not do very well in the tournament this year, but look out for them next year. They could be a force to be reckoned with.
We'll see.
But we're going to go ahead and take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to discuss all things March Madness, and we'll take a look at each region when we come back.
Founded in 1985, the Missouri Valley Football Conference has established a tradition of FCS football excellence. Competing at the highest level of NCAA Division I, student athletes at its 10 institutions demonstrate character, passion, and integrity as they grow as a student, an athlete, and a citizen. The Missouri Valley Football Conference, where leaders are shaped and champions are forged.
We got to get downtown to Sandy's Donuts so we can study for that chemistry test.
Yeah, let's get going, but I'm going to drive instead.
All right, man, I'm going to take the map bus. So what are you majoring in?
Sorry I'm late. It's been a crazy day.
Welcome back to X's and O's. We're going to go ahead and move right into what is arguably the second most popular sporting event in the United States, March Madness, the NCAA Men's Basketball Tournament. Taking a look at the bracket really quick, the top 4 number 1 seeds are Duke, Virginia, North Carolina, and Gonzaga. 3 ACC teams in the top 1 seeds. Isaac, what do you think of that?
Probably doesn't surprise me. The ACC is the best conference, I think, in the country, top to bottom. And, I mean, really it just proves that by looking at the seeding. I mean, Duke, Virginia, and UNC, they were the top 3 teams in their respective conference. And, I mean, probably just shows that, they have the most talent. The ACC's got plenty of teams that are especially formidable, and those are the 3 teams that perform the best against that conference. Not surprising, in my opinion.
Do you think any teams like Michigan State or some SEC teams think they should have been a 1 seed? Do you think they arguably should have been a 1 seed, or do you think it was the committee made the right call?
I'll tell you one thing, I can never be a bracketologist. It's so hard at times to determine where teams properly should be in terms of this tournament. But it's probably fair that Michigan State, even though they won the Big Ten tournament and they had a lot of, they were thinking that maybe they should have gotten a 1 seed, but who knows really there is a method to this, but man, that stuff's beyond my comprehension.
Yeah.
I can never properly seed these teams and have everybody, and it's really impossible to have everybody be happy when you seed these teams.
So what I want to do for this segment is kind of take you through each region and kind of get your brief opinion and reactions to how do you think teams are going to play out through this region? I don't know if you've filled out your bracket yet or not.
I have not filled it out yet. I'm waiting until the play-in games are done.
Until the play-in games. So, but just kind of, we're going to go through each region of the bracket and kind of give me your snap reaction to them. Does that sound good?
Sure.
Starting with the East region, what do you think of that one?
It's a pretty weak one, I would say. I mean, there's pretty much Duke and Michigan State, and there's a lot of everybody else just kind of there. I mean, the other top seeds really don't jump out at, as something that they can really knock out they can knock out Duke or Michigan State. It's just, there's going to be plenty of good games, I think, in the first round of this of this part of the bracket. I'm really looking forward to seeing the VCU and UCF game that would take on either Duke or NDSU or NC Central. That's going to be a really good game. VCU is the number 1 team in the Atlantic 10 during the regular season, and UCF's a very formidable team out of the AAC. I also am looking at, in that region, the Mississippi State Liberty, the 5-12 matchup there. I kind of think that, based on what analysts are saying about this game, they really like Liberty. Don't be surprised if they knock off Mississippi State in that one.
There's got to be at least one 5-12 upset in the NCAA tournament. It's been kind of a tradition. Been a trend the last few years. Now, just go take me to the West region. Tell me what you think of that one.
Gonzaga getting in the number 1 seed in that one. Again, not a surprise. NDSU saw firsthand what Gonzaga can do as they beat the Bison by 40 points plus in September. So, but otherwise, this is going to be another really good region. There are going to be a lot of teams in here that maybe you haven't paid too much attention to this season. Like, for instance, the 5-12 matchup in the West region, Marquette versus Murray State. That's going to be a very good game, in my opinion. There are 2 very good scorers in this game. John Morant of Murray State and Marcus Howard of Marquette, both very good scorers in their own way. That's going to be a very good game. Also, I think my dark horse in this tournament probably got to be the 4th-seeded Florida State Seminoles. They're playing against Vermont in their first-round game. Florida State has a lot of really good athletes, and they played very well against Duke in the ACC championship game. They have a lot of good athletes. They're very tall inside. And it's really just a matter of whether they can make shots, as I really like their roster. But otherwise, the rest of the West region, Buffalo, they were a 30-win team out of the MAC this year. Don't be surprised if they end up making a run. Texas Tech, Northern Kentucky, 2 really good teams. That's going to be another good game as well. This West region is going to be a bloodbath, considering how, also Nevada, Florida, Michigan, there are plenty of good teams. This is probably going to be one of the best regions to look out for, in my opinion, in this tournament.
The thing I found interesting about Buffalo, they're a 6th seed this year, but they were only a 13th seed, if I remember correctly.
And they won a game last year against Arizona, I'm pretty sure.
It's going to be, and it was it was kind of funny in the way Arizona lost because they were dealing with so much
Right.
NCAA restrictions and violations. But just to see
You
them,
can't get any NCAA tournament wins revoked if you don't win one. That was the popular thing on Twitter last year after they lost.
It was funny to see. It was great to see such an unknown school like Buffalo just go against a giant basketball program like Arizona and just win that game. From what I can remember, pretty handily. It wasn't a blowout.
Watch out for the Buffalo Bulls.
Yeah,
watch out for the Buffalo Bulls.
Yeah. So take me through the South region now. Virginia, the number 1 seed in that one.
You're always playing with fire when you got Virginia as a high seed in your region. Obviously, they made the big headlines last year. They were the first 1 seed to lose to a 16 seed in tournament history.
They didn't just lose; they got smoked.
They were down by 20 points with like 3
smoked.
minutes to go in that game. Now, obviously, you can't predict. It's very difficult to predict that will happen again. But with Virginia, not only with last year being on their minds, but also they've dealt with expectations like they're having right now in the past and have always come up short. This is going to be another very important year for Tony Bennett and the Virginia Cavaliers. Can they actually get through their region and get to the Final Four and maybe win the NCAA tournament that so many analysts have been predicting them to win for years?
Yeah, and then just take me through the Midwest region, just as a little bit of just give me what do you think of them?
And I mean, again, with the top seed in the region being UNC, no surprise there. They're a blue blood program. They beat Duke twice during the regular season. I'm going to be really interested in what happens with this Auburn-New Mexico State game, another 5-12 matchup. And, some people are picking New Mexico State in this game. I heard someone during the SEC tournament say that Auburn's, their lack of success against SEC teams during the season is largely because they're kind of tired of playing SEC teams. They might be a better tournament team than what may meet the eye. They're a really good three-point shooting team, and three-point shooting can get you anywhere in basketball these days. Don't be surprised if Auburn ends up winning that game against New Mexico State and turning some heads. Iowa State's another good team in that Midwest region. They just won the Big 12 tournament in surprising fashion. Houston is another really good team. They're a 3 seed after surprising people last year in the tournament. And Wofford, the Wofford Terriers, a team the Bison played in football in the tournament last year, I'm pretty sure. They're really good at basketball now this year. They were among I think they were in the final NCAA top 25 at the end of the season. They're only a 7 seed, and they can do some real damage, especially considering that they're kind of they're another one of those under the radar teams that you haven't really heard of. You're not really used to hearing about. That if they end up meeting, Wofford and Kentucky might be a really good second round matchup.
Then taking a look at the bracket as a whole, do you think there are any teams that may have gotten snubbed or should have gotten a better or worse seed?
I kind of think Ohio State in the Midwest region, they probably didn't deserve to make it. They had, I think they had 13 or 14 losses on their season, and they were 8th in the Big Ten. I think 8 teams, I'm pretty sure, from the Big Ten made it, and Ohio State was one of those fringe teams, like are they in, are they out? I think it was largely because of their early season success. They were ranked earlier in the season, and then they just kind of had an average Big Ten season this year. I don't know. Ohio State's a little fishy for me. Otherwise, I think Florida is a 10 seed. They could be even though they might have been a little higher seed probably than maybe they deserve, since considering they lost a ton of regular season games too. But don't be surprised if they end up surprising some people and beat Nevada in the first round, and maybe take Michigan if they win their first round game to the wire in the second round.
Yeah. So I know you haven't filled out your bracket yet, but do you have some sort of idea of who you think is going to win the whole tournament?
Probably Duke. I mean, if we're going to be honest, I mean, Duke's got a lot of NBA talent, and their 3 best players alone, those 3 top players on Duke very well could go 1, 2, and 3 in the draft. It's unbelievable. But there's a lot of good teams in this tournament, and a lot of good coaches as well in this tournament that you can't discount. Michigan State's always, it seems like, more often than not, they're good for an Elite 8 run. it seems like Duke, obviously being with Mike Krzyzewski, they can make a deep tournament run pretty much any year. But the biggest question mark, like I touched on earlier, can Virginia get over the hump and actually and live up to their expectations this year and win more than just a couple tournament games this year?
I think that's one of the biggest things you have to look at. I also think Duke is going to probably win it. But when we're looking at Virginia, I think this is the year they have to prove they're not just some...
By the way, the defending champion Villanova, they're only a 6 seed. They didn't have that great of a regular season, and they had to replace a lot of players from last year's team. They might have a lot to prove this year, too.
I'm going to make changes as the days go on. But I think Villanova is going to be another one of those dark horse teams. They've always been in contention, especially in the past few years when they've won 2 national championships. It's just... You can't overlook them, even though they're a 6 seed, not in the 1 or 2 seed.
Yeah, they're not a pure blood, consensus high seed.
Their
this
record
year.
doesn't do them justice. They're always dangerous when it comes into the tournament. But I think when it comes to Duke, yes, they're going to win. But the scary thing is if Zion gets hurt again, what's going to happen?
It's definitely an issue. That could be an issue.
When Zion was hurt, UNC beat Duke both times.
Twice. Mm-hmm.
And they had the 2 top other recruits out of high school on that starting lineup. But I think Zion is the heart and soul of that Duke team. And they basically run everything through him.
I don't think that can be disputed much.
It's really not an argument. Zion is the heart and soul of that team, and when you take him out, like if you limit him on shots or if he's hurt, you might have a chance against Duke. But if Zion is healthy and he's playing well, look out.
Their front court's also going to be a big question mark considering they lost their center in one of their last games of the season, their regular starting center at least. So
I think another thing you have to look at is in the 2 seed Michigan State, they lost one of their better players in the Big Ten championship game. I believe his last name is Ahrens. He was out of the game completely. His foot was in an air cast. He was watching from the sideline. He's one of the best players in the country that nobody's really talking about, because he's not Zion Williamson, he's not Luke May of UNC, but that could play a big factor in how Michigan State does in the tournament. But like we've said, it's probably going to be Duke who's going to end up winning.
I do like Cassius Winston on Michigan State quite a bit, though.
Well, that's going to do it for us for this edition of X's and O's. For Bison Information Network, I'm Joe Thompson.
And I'm Isak Dinesen.
We'll see you next time.